Hi, I'm Femi OK. On this episode of The Stream, we're looking at what we learned living through the coronavirus pandemic this year and how it might help us as we head into 2022. We have a team of medical professionals standing by to answer your questions. We start with Dr. Madad.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on all of our lives. Disruption to daily life, from the mental health impact to seeing illness in our community and our own families, to the economic and international impact of travel has been so significant. We need to also have good public health policy. This includes putting on a mask when community transmission is high, physical distancing, having testing available at all times. Really important that we have these resources to everybody that needs it. And then third, we need to have good risk and science communication on an ongoing basis. We need to inform people what is happening and how they need to change their behavior as things continue to evolve.
The big question we're asking on this episode is, can we beat coronavirus in 2022? What do we need to do that? We need Dr. Margaret, Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Anant, our guests for today. Nice to see all three of you. Dr. Margaret, will you introduce yourself to our international audience? Tell them who you are, what you do.
Good evening. I'm a doctor, but I've also been a journalist and I work for the World Health Organization. And my job really is to inform you about what you can do to protect yourself from all kinds of health threats. But in the last 2 years, it's really been COVID.
Dr. Ahmed, it's always good to have you here on the stream. Thanks for making time. Remind our audience who you are, what you do.
Thanks for having me, Femi. So my name's Ahmed. I'm a doctor and a journalist based in London.
Good to have you. And Dr. Anant, always good to see you as well. Please remind our audience who you are, what you do.
Thanks, Femi. Good to be on the show. Hi, everyone. I'm a medical doctor based in Bhopal in central India, and I'm a researcher in bioethics, global health, and health policy.
All right, so many PhDs strewn through the stream today. Use them, okay? We have so many great resources for you right here. If you're on YouTube, you've got concerns, you have questions, pop them right here into the comments section. I will do my best to put them right into today's show. I'm actually going to start with a question that came via Twitter. Margaret, we're going to make you work straight away. This one came from a doctor. Dr. Douglas says, as the virus mutates when transmitted, is there a possibility that a new variant will be more transmissible than Omicron, more deadly than Delta, and resistant to current immune responses? Is that possible?
That is unfortunately possible, and that is the worst case scenario. So that's exactly why we have been begging the world to be fair about distribution of vaccines, because we need to get the people who are likely to be sickest protected, because when somebody's sick for a long time, that's when there's the opportunity for these mutations to occur.
I'm going to play a small report from one of our correspondents called Neve Barker, who was reporting from London a day or so ago. This is what he shared with us, Ahmed. Love you to come off the back of that report, because my concerns are really about NHS staff and burnout. Here's Neve, first of all.
With cases doubling every 2 days, health experts warn the vaccination effort needs to reach people who haven't had a single dose. That's an estimated 1.3 million in London, many millions more across the country. Analysis shows poorer, younger and more ethnically diverse communities are least protected.
The more people that get sick, the more critical services could soon be in trouble. There are currently so many staff at this one London hospital trust who are down with COVID and away from work that they've had to draft in extra help from elsewhere just to man the hospital's accident and emergency unit. Add to that a possible risk of a surge in the number of people ending up in hospital suffering with the Omicron variant, and the country's National Health Service could soon be overwhelmed.
Yeah, so it's quite difficult, because when you do catch COVID, even though you might not feel that bad yourself as maybe a young doctor, you still have to take the time off work, which puts strain on your colleagues because they're now having to work almost extra hours. Like I know one doctor who finished his shift, I think, at 4 a.m. and was called back in straight away to get back into hospital at 5 a.m. just because there was no senior doctor around to, supervise the junior doctors. So it becomes unsafe when you're having to work in situations like that, where you're physically tired, making life-saving decisions, And it becomes almost a strain where you're having to pick up other people's work. So it's not actually the COVID itself that's making you sick and not being able to work that well. It's just the fact that you have to take time off, putting extra strain on a already strained and understaffed health service.
And I'm just thinking of those images that we saw from India's second wave earlier on this year that were deeply distressing and shocking. Out of that second wave, what did India learn? What are you going into the new year with? What tools do you have now?
Thanks, Femi. Yes, so it was, a very troubling time, as you were rightly saying. A lot of distress, a lot of failure of the health system to be able to cope with the increasing number of cases. Fortunately, since then, I think we've been able to ramp up our health services to a fair extent. Our testing levels have gone up. Our testing infrastructure has gone up. India's done fairly well on the vaccination side as well, though, there's a lot of ground to cover. But that having been said, new variants bring their own challenges. And I think in the new year, one would hope that we are better prepared to be able to handle any kind of a wave. Now, so far, India has been okay. We've not seen the kind of rapid increase that we are seeing in other parts of the world. But the festive season ahead could actually be a risk, given a lot of people are traveling around and meeting each other, and mask usage, public health measures seem not to be adhered to the extent one would like. So, it's going to be tough times ahead, but hopefully we will be able to cope. And, and as Margaret was very rightly saying, the most important issue here is to ensure vaccine equity, not just in India, but across the world. The more people we get vaccinated, the more vulnerable individuals we are able to protect soon. I think we will all be in a much better state.
I'm so glad you mentioned vaccine inequity. Margaret, you can definitely jump in here. I really want to hear your thoughts. There was something that I saw recently and I was truly, truly shocked. It was AstraZeneca in a tip in Nigeria because it had expired. And there was a plan for this. There was COVAX. Like, even if you weren't the richest nation, there was a plan so that some vaccines could go to countries who might not have the purchasing power. Margaret, I'm going to say what went wrong. You can challenge me if you want to.
Oh, no, it's heartbreaking. And what went wrong was Nigeria was sent doses by donor countries that were just about to expire. And Nigeria is not the only country. I've just come back from Afghanistan. I spent a month there, and they were racing to vaccinate people with, again, it was Johnson & Johnson, and it was about to expire when they received doses in August, September, that were about to expire in November. They managed to vaccinate. They managed to do it, which is incredible, given particularly the circumstances they're struggling with all the other things. But there are so many countries, and first of all, they're waiting. They don't know when they're going to get the vaccines. They don't know what they're going to get, and they don't know what the expiry date is. And then suddenly, and of course, it comes to us, suddenly we've got these doses, and here they are, and, quickly, we rushed them in there, and Nigeria found, I don't think it was all COVAX donations they had. They managed to get through the ones they got from COVAX. Yeah. But the problem is they received vaccines that essentially were within a week of expiry date, I think, by the time they were on the tarmac.
Yeah. Let me just play
a donation, but
yeah. let me just play a little bit of this clip, because I'm sure viewers, when you see it, you'll be as aggrieved as I was when I saw beautiful boxes of vaccine just put onto the tip. Let's take a look.
Health officials and journalists watched as more than 1 million doses of expired AstraZeneca vaccine were crushed. The destroyed vaccines were part of a massive shipment of more than 2 million doses received in October, a donation from developed nations. By November, many of them had expired.
We accepted this vaccine in an environment where, despite the interest, despite concerted effort by the federal government to procure these vaccines were not available in the open market a few months ago because they had largely been mopped up by the wealthier nations. And we had no choice to accept these vaccines with short shelf lives.
And it just seems that we failed the ethics test there as a world, like supporting our fellow countries. We failed that. We got an F. Thoughts?
Absolutely. In this kind of a situation where we've been going through a pandemic and now for close to 2 years, that we have to depend on vaccine charity and not vaccine justice or vaccine equity is deeply troubling. If we don't understand that solidarity is at the heart of any response to a pandemic, that we are all protected when everyone is protected. It is not by being nationalistic about this, about being narrow-minded about your response that you're going to protect your citizens, because we've seen variants travel, the virus has traveled. There's just no way of stopping the spread unless everyone is protected. So actually, it is in everyone's interest, including countries themselves, to be able to work with other countries to ensure that everyone is protected. And and Margaret Ahmed would agree with me on this, that we have actually failed as a world in this. And if I have one hope for 22, it is that we would have learned our lessons and we would do better.
I think what we need to remember about all this is that unfortunately we live in this, I guess we would say, a capitalistic society where money kind of controls the rules that we go around. And, a couple of years ago, there was that famous CEO of a pharmaceutical company who raised the price of a life-saving drug by 6,000% in America. Yeah. And when he was put on trial, the response he gave was, this is a capitalistic society. I want to make money. This is why I did it. And that's the same thing we're seeing with these vaccines again. So the Pfizer vaccine is on course to be the most lucrative drug of 2022. And it's already been the most lucrative of 2021, where I think they were predicted to receive around $26 billion just for Pfizer. Despite that, they decided to do a price hike a couple of months ago for the Pfizer vaccine. So when we turn around and say, this shouldn't be a charity, a vaccine charity, the problem is that we live in a society which promotes people hoarding money, hoarding wealth. And yes, what we have to remember is that Pfizer, their vaccine was actually developed through public funds. So Trump, when he was president, he actually provided Pfizer with government money to be able to develop their vaccine. So it's unfortunate that despite this money coming from public funds, it's not being returned to the public or the world.
We have.
And I think it's important to. Oh, sorry.
You go first, Margaret. Go on.
It's really important to also say we never intended it to be a charity, and it's very, very wrong. I keep hearing this, rich countries giving to poor countries. The whole point of the COVAX system and the system we set up with many rich nations, but with basically nations around the world, was to have a system by which we could roll out vaccines in an orderly way to the highest priority groups at exactly the same time. That was the agreement, that was the understanding, and it wasn't about charity. It was purely about
Margaret,
sensible distribution.
Are we doing better now? Because everyone's been talking about vaccine inequity for a year, right? Almost a year. Now, are we doing better now?
We're certainly getting more vaccines coming out. So we've managed to reach the 800,000th dose rolled out. But worldwide, 8.5 billion doses have been rolled out, and there are 16 times more doses given, I think 16 times more boosters. I haven't got the numbers in front of me. Way more boosters being given in wealthy countries than primary doses getting into the country still failing to vaccinate. So, and those are programmatic decisions being made by wealthier countries. Yeah, and we're not seeing hoarding yet, but we're very, very concerned that those sort of decisions are going to continue to skew the supply. Right. So we'll still struggle to get those primary doses into people's arms.
One more thought on this.
To that,
go on, Ahmed, and then I'm moving on. Go on.
In terms of the boosters, the Pfizer CEO 2 weeks ago said, to combat Omicron, we're going to need to have a fourth booster. So that's also promoting wealthier nations from trying to purchase up more of the vaccines, which I think we don't even have the research to tell us how bad Omicron is. Does Pfizer work against Omicron? We don't have any of that data. But just him saying that increased the shares that Pfizer had, increased the share price of Pfizer, and welcome more purchases in wealthier nations. So it is a difficult thing to navigate.
All right, so one more thought on this, and then I'm pushing us on because we have to look ahead to 2022 as well. Hans, who's watching right now, says it's shameful that so much of the world is unvaccinated, considering, this is me adding on to it, considering how much science has been done, which is where I want to go to next, which is the science that has been done so quickly. Let me bring in Derek Lowe. He's a drug discovery researcher who basically flags what's happened this year and what's going to be exciting next year when we look at the pandemic. Here he is.
One part of the good news is that vaccine production is continuing to go up. Another part is that this coming year, we should have at least 2 more vaccines, new ones, coming on. We have to distribute those around the world, deep into a lot of countries, and get our distribution networks up to speed. One other thing is that there's a new pill, a protease inhibitor, which is much easier to make than the vaccines and is already being licensed to generic companies around the world. So I hope that helps too. We're in a completely new era with Omicron, but vaccines, I think, are still the way that the world gets out of this pandemic. And I just hope that 2022 is the year that we say that we got out of it.
Anna, that takes us into positive territory, and India is often known as the pharmacy of the world. You make so many of these vaccines, so many drugs. How are you feeling looking ahead into 2022? Are the scientists really doing extraordinary work here that is going to help us out of where we are right now?
Absolutely. They've done stellar work. I mean, there's no doubt at all that the kind of science we've seen over the last 2 years has really shown that when you get to it, when there is a conducive environment and support from government, from other stakeholders, from regulators, you can actually make things happen. The fact that we have vaccines, the fact that we managed to do multinational clinical trials with literally thousands of patients in well under a year just shows that progress is possible. And, countries like India, certainly, which have the manufacturing capacity, can help support a larger availability of drugs, therapeutics, vaccines. But for that, I think globally we have to agree that the priority should not be profits. The priority should not be intellectual property. The priority has to be solidarity. The priority has to be, just global health and ensuring that as a world we cope better with this pandemic. And if we can get that sorted out at various levels, then I think there is a lot of hope for 2022. And what I'm also hopeful for is that this experience teaches us that for the many other diseases which still need solutions, we can get scientists together to focus on those problems in the same urgency as we've seen for COVID.
Margaret, I'm going to share a couple of headlines with our audience, and you can see them here on my laptop. I want to ask you what you and the WHO are seeing in terms of science advancement and how fast it's happening. US Army creates single vaccine against all COVID and SARS variants, researchers say. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that's in the US, authorises antiviral pill as first approved at-home treatment for COVID. That's a game changer, potentially. Pfizer agrees to allow generic versions of its COVID pill. One more headline here. Researchers developing process to store COVID-19 vaccines at room temperature. That is really going to help with developing nations. Margaret, what are you seeing that gives you hope in terms of science and the pandemic?
I've seen tremendous things, right actually from the beginning. I mean, we only knew this virus existed for a few weeks before the scientists all came together already with ideas about how we were going to solve this problem. I remember being in a room with scientists from all around the world, all zooming in because they were in other countries, not because of COVID at the time. And they were talking about what they knew so far about this family of viruses, what vaccines were possibly in the making, how on earth you would structure the studies. And they were sharing. It didn't matter what country they were from. They were all determined to get on top of it. And fast forward 10 months later, we had vaccines. We had vaccines going into people's arms. That's never happened. That's unprecedented. We also had huge numbers of trialists, scientists studying all the different drugs that were available already to see if there was something we already had that could work. Not much did work, but we found that steroids did. And of course, as you've mentioned, we now have a whole range of different treatments. Antivirals, we've got the immunological treatments, a whole range of treatments that did not exist, were not there, that we now have. So, wow, the scientific world has stood up together in solidarity. I would just like other parts of the human race to share that kind of solidarity.
I mean, I've got a couple of thoughts for you from YouTube, which I'd really love you to engage with. Javier says, many people wait until they're at death's door to demand the medical community do everything to save them. This is about prevention, lessening demand for health care. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question, to be honest, because obviously we respect everyone's freedoms and things like that. But when it comes to something as simple as putting on a face mask, as in it's quite literally a cloth on your face, just for the few minutes that you're on public transport with someone or going to a public venue, why is it so difficult for people to understand that? And you're right, people suddenly demand it. As soon as they're about to die, they want to be intubated, they want to go to the ICU, they want the emergency medications. Some people even ask for the vaccine whilst they're on the bed towards being.
Is that an apocryphal story,
intubated.
Ahmed? I mean, have you ever heard that?
Yeah, no, as in, I remember one time, this was, I ended up being on a bus once, and there was a guy not wearing a face mask. And I just told him, do you mind just lifting it up? And he turned around to me, and this was in the US, and he turned around to me and said, you liberals, like you supporting Biden and all this stuff. And I was like, this isn't a discussion relating to politics, to science, or anything like that. It's purely to do with, even if, for example, somebody was using a word that I didn't like, and they told me to stop using that word, out of respect, I would. So simply out of respect, someone's uncomfortable, lift your mask up. It's not that difficult, and it's for a short period. So that kind of stuff I don't understand fully.
Yeah.
And I do think there needs to be more done to be able to support ourselves in terms of being able to do that. I've never seen myself somebody ask for the vaccine, but I've read articles. There was this one anaesthetist who was asked, she wrote an article, I think it was in the Chicago Tribune, she said a number of patients, as she was going to intubate them, were asking for the vaccine. And unfortunately, it's way too late that once you're that sick, the vaccine isn't going to do anything to help.
So Jeannie says politics have ruined people getting vaxxed in the United States. Politics led the population here, and I believe in other countries as well. Capital letters, shameful. So we've had incredible leadership from scientists and our policymakers. They're probably somewhere behind that, I'm saying diplomatically here. Ahmed, the first time that we asked you to be on the stream, you had lines on your face from the mask that you've been wearing. It was crisis mode. How are you treating people who now have COVID in hospital? What advances have been made in treatment that going into 2022, you're not necessarily in crisis mode, or are you still?
I think it's a few different aspects to that question. Number one, I don't think we're in crisis mode as much as we were before, even though we're recording record numbers of COVID. I think either the vaccines worked, Omicron isn't that bad, or various other things. It's an issue where we're not actually seeing that many come in who are acutely unwell. The other thing is we haven't really made that many treatment advances. The treatment still is provide oxygen if they need ventilation, intubate and ventilate. It's just a lot more streamlined. Yeah. We kind of know the numbers of oxygen levels we're targeting, that kind of stuff. So that from that perspective, it's a lot more streamlined. And then, giving the steroids, the recommended doses and things like that, it happens a lot earlier than it was happening before. Before it was kind of guess and go, whereas now it's almost like we kind of know the basics as to what's going to work. There are some new drugs that have coming out, medications that possibly might work. We're not still using them yet in the acute phase. We're using them in patients that are being treated at home. But whether or not that will improve in the acute phase later might be a potential for us to benefit from.
Sure. I'm reading your face, and your face seems more hopeful for 2022 from the previous faces that we've had when we talked about coronavirus. And Nant, you as well, you're looking much more hopeful than on previous conversations. There's something that we've got a hold on now, but can we fix our biggest challenges in 2022? That is still to be determined. Dr. Margaret, Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Anand, thank you so much for your conversation and for your advice and your guidance. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go to YouTube one more time. Hedisham, our question was, can we beat coronavirus in 2022? And Hedisham on YouTube says, it's going to be 5 years. Oh my goodness. 5 more years of stream shows about coronavirus. Brace yourself. Thank you very much, guests. Really appreciate you. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take care.